Thank you again so much for organizing this and for inviting me to this beautiful school and having a chance to communicate with other people and the students and faculty here. This is a great experience. Thank you so much. I'm very interested in what my colleague was saying about the arts. So I might say a few things about that. Recently, I was asked by the current Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, to write his annual report as a ghostwriter. Okay. And it is just out a few days ago, and it's the first time, and under his direction, he wanted it to be read, and so he wanted it to look artistic. Color, photographs, graphs, all kinds of things. Little did they know when they asked me to write it, because I am a UN scholar, that I'm also an artist. They didn't know that. And so when you were talking about how important communication is and storytelling and empathy, I thought that's what I was doing in the report. So I just wanted to take a couple of minutes to show some of the photographs. Okay, I wanted to choose photographs that elicited that kind of empathy, because the Sustainable Development Goals that the UN has created to try to address issues of poverty, gender discrimination, he wanted to highlight. And one of the things that they're saying is no one left behind. And I had to choose a photograph that said, no one should be left behind. And so I chose this picture of a farmer out in the field in Yemen by himself. He is also not going to be left behind. That's what the UN says. So it was part of what I was trying to do, communicate and create empathy, so that when 193 member states read this, because they all have to, it's his report, I'm hoping that they will care and that they will be drawn in. And so that was one of them that I wanted to show you, but also the work that the UN does, because we hear a lot of bashing of the UN. Oh, everybody just goes there and talks, and they don't really do anything. And actually, the UN does so much around the world. We have over 100,000 peacekeepers that are out trying to protect and create security in different parts of the world. And we have over 65,000 refugees right now, the biggest ever. In 2003, there were only 9,000 refugees. And in that short time, we now have 65 million, 65 million refugees. And so I chose various refugee camps to show the people who are living there. These people are working to build the camps. They're not just lazy or anything like that. I mean, so I chose pictures that would show through this visual empathy what people were really doing. And so I'm hoping that at the UN, we will be bringing the arts and this kind of sense of communication through words and pictures and graphs that will make a more dramatic impact on the member states and create a better understanding of what the UN is doing. So I'm glad that you were bringing this up, because it made me realize, wow, that's what I'm really trying to do. Okay, so now shifting gears. What I wanted to talk about today is gender equality. And I got into this field because a couple of years ago, when we were considering the election of a new Secretary General, I led a group, an NGO, to try to get a woman elected Secretary General. We have now 9. We've never had a woman. So we did a lot, and we worked very hard. And there were 13 women, there were 13 candidates, 7 women and 6 men. We did not prevail. As you know, we have Antonio Guterres from Portugal, and I admire him, and I think he's a terrific Secretary General. But we did not prevail. Nevertheless, what happened through our campaign is that every candidate for Secretary General promised that they would elevate women to higher positions and achieve gender equity within the UN system. And I feel like, we achieved that. And so Antonio Guterres has promised that he will create gender equity within the upper levels of the UN, the very high level positions within the UN, within the next few years. And he has started out in a pretty strong way. He has, and I'll show you, I chose this picture to show what he's doing. And this is Antonio Guterres. This is his deputy Secretary General, sort of like a vice president, and from Amina Mohammed from Nigeria, and Maria Viaggi from Brazil. So the 3 top women, actually, she's his chief of staff, and she's the deputy, and then Antonio. So he is trying already to live up to his promise that he will elevate women to top positions, and not only just women, but people from around the world. So he's really is working at it. Now I also added, where are we? So last year, the UN decided to create a set of goals called the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, to be achieved within the next 15 years. So by 2030, they hope to achieve these goals. And one is to eliminate extreme poverty. And that is the number of people living on less than $1.25 a day. And you'd be surprised how many people live on that little tiny bit. So that's a big challenge. Goal 5, which is what I'm going to talk about today, is on women and girls. And the goal in general is to achieve gender equality and empower all women and girls. Now, within each goal, there are targets. So the 2 targets of this goal that I want to specifically focus on are ensure women's full and effective participation and equal opportunities for leadership at all levels of decision-making in political, economic, and public life. What that means is that women should be empowered to become a part of members of parliament, also to join local town councils, to be able to become a part of the business community and be leaders. But the next target that I wanted to focus on is to undertake reforms to give women equal rights to economic resources, as well as access to ownership and control over land and other forms of property, financial services, inheritance, natural resources, in accordance with national laws. So what this means is to empower women to own property. Now, we may all assume from our cultures, yeah, of course, women own property. You can have your own car, you can own your house, you can have a bank account, but in many, many parts of the world, women cannot own property. They can't own their own home. They can't own a bank account. And everything has to be in a man's name, either their husband, their father, their brother, or even a son, but not in the woman's name.
Can you give some examples? Sorry.
I'm going to give you an example. Thank you. I spent some time in Ghana, and I've done a lot of research work in Ghana. The tradition in Ghana is that women cannot own property. They can't own property of any kind. If their husband dies, They cannot live in their own house. They don't have rights to their children. They don't inherit any assets, and they must be sent back to the village where they came from. And the husband's family then takes the property and takes the children. It sounds very shocking to you, right? Very shocking. But this is the tradition. This is the culture. And so if women cannot own property of any kind, they don't have any independence. So to expect them to get elected to parliament or expect them to be a part of decision making, they can't if they have no independence. So property leads to independence. Independence then leads to you being able to make your own decision. Otherwise, all your decisions are dependent on whatever male is in your family. So these goals are really essential for women to achieve. And I'm very proud of the fact that 193 members of the UN have agreed that these are important goals. To get them even to agree that this is a problem is very important. So I'm excited and hopeful that this will take on a life of its own. And the other thing that the goals do is to bring partnerships. So governments like Norway or Sweden or the US are asked then to create funding for the achievement of these goals. NGOs are involved. They'll go in on the ground and help to build this kind of institutions. Members of parliament will be asked to pass legislation within their own parliaments to create these laws. So you can start with the laws, which is very important, but you have to change the culture. So in Ghana, for example, a few years ago, the Supreme Court, and the chief of the Supreme Court in Ghana is a woman. So that's very exciting. And the Supreme Court made a decision that upon the death of a spouse, and they made it neutral, that either one, the remaining spouse, would inherit half the assets. So that was to contradict the tradition, to make a new law saying that women do have a right to property. So they passed the law, but it's not enforced. So we're taking incremental steps, but it's not there yet. So much more has to be done to put these things in place. Now that we've got this relationship, I want to do some positive things. I want to say some positive achievements. So right now, we have 15 female heads of government. So it's very exciting. 8 of whom are the first in their country to reach this level of achievement. So 15. But as I said, there are 193 members at the UN. So we have 15 women heads of state out of 193. But still, that's an achievement. And what we're seeing now, and when we were pushing for a woman to become Secretary General, people said to us, well, who are you going to recommend? And I said, I'm going to make a list of 40. And people said, oh, you'll be lucky if you get 8. Well, we had a beautiful list of bios, photos of women from around the world who were foreign ministers, who were former prime ministers, defense ministers. There's like 5 or 6 women who are defense ministers of important countries. And what we realized is that the policies of various countries now around the world looking at gender equity finally are educating women coming up through the schools, getting them into college, and getting them started in the political field. So now we're beginning to see them rise up. So the foreign minister for the European Union is a woman from Italy, actually. She's the foreign minister for the whole EU. And so we're seeing that women are beginning to rise up to these levels, even though it's still a small number. So women in parliament, now some of this was measured by the UN over the years. So I'm giving you statistics from the UN's own offices. In parliament, over the last 2 decades, women have gained ground in 90% of the countries around the world. And yet, still, only 1 in 5 members of parliament are women. So only 20% are women now, but they've been growing, so that's very exciting. So I don't know if you would be able to guess which country has the most women in parliament. I don't know. Oh, do you know? Rwanda. Absolutely fantastic. Great audience. 61%. 61% of members of parliament are women in Rwanda. Bolivia is the next with 53%. So it's very exciting. The US is very low. It's 99th on the list. So I have the whole list here. The US is only 99th with just 19%. And it is bested, meaning these countries did better. So Tunisia has 31% women, Afghanistan with 28% women. So you can see that around the world, this is growing. So it's hopeful. It's hopeful. We still have to do a better job if we want to get more women engaged. In terms of education, many more girls are in school now than in 1990. And some examples, I'm being positive here. In Southern Asia, in 1990, only 74 girls were enrolled in primary school compared to 100 boys. So for every 100 boys, there were 74 girls. Today, there are 103 girls for every 100 boys. Good for the girls, right? All right. And even more impressive is in Latin America, in college, there are 114 girls going to college for every 100 boys. So the girls are outdoing the boys in Latin America. Very exciting. Now, maternal health is a very big issue. In many places around the world, women are dying in childbirth. And when that happens, that means that women are not getting enough food, they're not getting enough vitamins, the clean water issue is bad, they're drinking bad water. So when you have high levels of maternal mortality, it's an indication of the development of the country as a whole. And since 1990, maternal mortality has declined by 45%. And the reason is that the UN has been working on this. And part of what they're doing is training midwives to get out to the villages, because many women are isolated from the healthcare system. And so they're training more midwives and getting the midwives out to the villages. And then also another tactic, again, funded through UN Women and other organizations, is to then, in the last month of pregnancy, to bring the mother to a clinic. So getting her there prior to birth, making sure she's eating enough, getting enough vitamins, and then being there for birth to be attended by a physician or a midwife, and then being there in case something goes wrong to have antibiotics and that kind of thing. So that has helped as well. So right now, 71% of births are attended by a skilled health practitioner, compared to only 59% in 1990. So all the work that the UN and the international community is doing is making it better. And I talked to you about the fact that Secretary General Antonio Guterres is working on and is committed to gender parity, equal men and women, in the high-level positions. And he has something called the Senior Management Group, which is kind of like his cabinet. And there are 42 members in the Senior Management Group. I have them if you're interested in looking at them, with their pictures and everything. And almost half are women already. So 21 would be half, but 19 are women. So I was really excited to see that. But if you look at undersecretaries, assistant secretaries, special representatives, if you look at all the high-level positions, there's still only about 27% are women. So there's a lot of work to be done. He wants to do it, but there are bureaucratic obstacles to some of it. But he's working on it. But nevertheless, when you look at what departments the women are heading, then you see that Department of Political Affairs headed by a man, the Department of Peacekeeping Operations headed by a man, UNDP headed by a man, the Department of Economic and Social Issues headed by a man. UNDP was headed by Helen Clark, a woman, and now she stepped down at the end of her term and she was replaced by a man. So what are considered like the hard issues, there's the culture still is that men should be doing that. So this has got to change. That kind of culture has to change. We're seeing more, though, of a push on women in peacekeeping. So I talked about the fact that the UN sends peacekeeping troops in uniform around the world to provide peace and security for countries who have been in conflict or still in conflict. And we've been pushing to get more women sent, not only for just representation, here's a woman, but because women are affected by conflict. They're suffering. Women refugees are really suffering. Some of them in their flight from certain parts of the world are giving birth on the way. So we need women there to listen to them and find out what are their needs and to be more sensitive to their needs. So there have been increases in women police officers and also in peacekeeping as well. And some units, like in Liberia, they set up a women's police unit. So all the police in that unit are women. And what they found was that women who were embarrassed or afraid to talk to men about, their particular problems, they were willing to come forward and talk to women. So there's a reason for having women out in the field. And so we're seeing increases in that. And then the heads of a number of different political and peacekeeping missions around the world are called special representatives of the Secretary General. And there's been more push to get women named to those spots. And right now, about 26% of heads of mission are women, up from 2% in just 2006. So even just 11 years ago, it was just 2%, dinky. And now if you see the graph, it's gone up, significantly. So there's more effort to do it. And they're finding that these women are doing a great job. I mean, they're heading these peacekeeping missions. I wanted to give you a little bit of flavor of where we are now, what some of the challenges are, and the hope that we have for further growth going into the future. So again, open to questions for the next period of time. Yes?
I actually love your speech because it comes from the offensive rather than the defensive. And I want to bring it back to what you were saying at the beginning of the speech, and this is more like a comment as well, is the problem is not that the UN is not doing great work, it's always doing great work. The problem is its Department of Public Information, and it hasn't been very good at communicating that. So the corporeality of what they're doing is not communicated, and any NGO or any private corporation wants to partner with something successful. But if it's not visceral and heard and felt outside of the echo chamber, then no one can participate. And in order for the UN to grow from this, it may need also an injection in that area, and especially in the women's area, and you're stemming from positive facts rather than the defensive facts of saying, well, there are so many people doing this and da, 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 da. Let's turn it around and look at all the positive things that are happening. Look at the facts about Rwanda and bringing it through the corporeality of what the waking consciousness of what Joseph Campbell says about how the arts can deliver all the symbolism, so we can bring focus to all those things.
Thank you very much for that comment, because I agree with you that the UN has not done enough. The Department of Public Information has been weakened over the years, and unfortunately, under various different secretaries general, it has been more prevalent and more out there, depending on the philosophy of the secretary general. So what we'd like to see is the public sharing of information be stepped up.
And in creative ways.
In very creative ways. I mean, I've done a lot of work with Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General before Ban Ki-moon. And Kofi Annan understood or created, actually, the idea that a Secretary General uses his position as a bully pulpit. And so he promoted the Millennium Development Goals, which preceded the Sustainable Development Goals. He promoted the Global Compact, which held businesses accountable for their human rights behavior. He promoted human rights around the world, and the concept of humanitarian intervention, which is a little shaky right now, but that originated with Kofi Annan. So he communicated, he went on talk shows, he held receptions, and that was his view of what his role was. But since then, the Secretaries General have been more quiet, quiet diplomacy. So I hope that we're going to change this around, and I've been excited that Antonio Guterres wants to communicate and understands the importance of visual presentation to get ideas across, and we're going to be continuing to do that. So yeah, just one other thing is, part of the problem with this communication is that the member states, many of them are extremely conservative, and they don't believe in the press, and they don't believe in the sharing of information. And unfortunately, if the SG, the Secretary General, doesn't really take command of this, then he'll be overwhelmed by member states who don't want that to happen, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I think we have another question here.
I'm wondering how aware they are about it might not be a big UN survey about the impact, possible impact of women in peace talks and sustainable peace. And that there are numbers showing that when they involve women in peace talks, and also at local level with the development processes of their societies after conflicts, that the peace is more sustainable. It lasts longer. This report.
I'm not aware of the report, but women have a tendency to want to listen and not walk in the room being an authority on everything. And that's really important when you're dealing with all kinds of issues of identity and conflict. You have to be able to be open-minded and really listen. I was very pleased to see that a woman named Natalia German, who is from Moldova, has just been named by Antonio Guterres to be the special representative for Central Asia. And she has a long, wonderful track record in Eastern and Central Europe of doing just what you're saying, being able to find a common ground to resolve conflicts that could have erupted into actual war. And so I was really pleased that he recognized her talents, and she's very young, she's 48. It may not seem so young to some of you, but I think it's young. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add something to what she was saying, the role of women in peace. And I'll take some example you just listed. If you look at Rwanda, we all know what happened in Rwanda in 1994. And it was kind of challenging for them to move on with that issue, the genocide. So what happened? The women had power, and after then, it's stable there. It's more peaceful. Another example is the case of Liberia with Ellen Johnson. I think she's the head of state there up now. Mm-hmm. And you know what happened with Charles Taylor. They had a lot of war, a lot of conflict, and ever since she stepped in, it's true, it's not absolute peace, but there is a great change, as you said. They listen to her, and I think there's more of the maternal aspect that concerns help. There are a lot of examples, and even on the economic aspect, you look at Germany with all what others went through in Europe, with Angela, I think they are fine with what she's doing. And we can check and we'll see that when women step in politics, they give them power, they will take decisions that will help, especially for the young generation. And we were all here yesterday talking about love, talking about education and everything. Who does that? When you look at the statistics, they are the women doing all the social, the basic issues in the world. So I think it's high time that we give them some power so that when they take this decision, they will take, if they can take decisions, they will take care, they will be like realizing or helping in bringing about love and some other elements that would promote peace.
Thank you very much for bringing that up, because I know Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is president of Liberia, really the way that she was able to, or that Liberia was able to end the conflict is women surrounded the parliament, and very dramatically, I'm not sure I should describe exactly how they did this, but very dramatically, they said, enough is enough, we have to stop this. What about our children? What about our country? It's being torn apart, it's being devastated. And then she was a part of that movement, and that was really what drew people's attention to the fact we have to have peace. And we have to elect a government that represents the people and represents the interests of the people, and not some kind of, national pride or whatever, you want to talk about, but or empowerment and corruption and all the other things that can go on. So it has made a very big difference, and we need to think more of how women can play that kind of role. You have a question?
Yes. So we, obviously understand that the impact of women has been great in the peacemaking mediation process, and that your statistics on the U.S. being 99th on the list is embarrassing.
It is.
What is being done to better get women involved in the decision-making process? I wish the girls were still here.
I know, I'm sorry they left, but they probably had class. Yeah.
I'm a high school educator, and we just started a program. So are there programs out there now that the UN is involved with to target young women to get into this decision-making process?
Well, UN Women in itself is an organization created by the UN a few years ago to focus energies on reaching out to women around the world. So, whether they would have any programs in the U.S., I'm not sure, but many women have been energized because of the results of this last election here in the U.S., and you hear more and more of women who are really frustrated and have decided to run for office, either locally or statewide or nationally, and we'll see if that does make an impact in the next round of elections. But I think we saw the Women's March in January, the day after inauguration, so January 21st, and there were 1.2 million people at that march. It was just absolutely incredible. And that also stimulated a lot of women to get involved. So we don't know what the results of all that will be yet. But these statistics are really grim. We need more. We need more women for a lot of reasons, not just to be represented, not a statistic, but they bring a different kind of quality. When we were talking about trying to get a woman elected Secretary General, we said, well, it's time, it's fair. But on the other hand, women do bring a different sense, a different experience, a very different experience to the office, because women have had to play that balancing role of deferring and yet getting things done, constantly balancing, doing that. And leadership takes that. And if you come from that experience, you bring that to the work that you have to do. And also raising your family and, your interest in sustaining life and family and not so much winning, So men, and the other thing I said, a woman can do anything a man can do, as long as it's not lifting logs or something like that. They're not, built, we're not built in the shoulders that strong. But in terms of leadership, women can do anything that a man can do, but they bring a different experience. So we can't afford to ignore 50% of the population of the world. 51%, or 51%. We can't afford to ignore that. We need to bring these women into the productive areas, and also into leadership and into decision making. So, we're on our way, but we have a lot farther to go.
Excuse me, madam. I think the question understood by our last participant. I wanted to know the answer, that what the UN women or the UN have been doing to bring changes here regarding the full and foremost participation of the women in US. And the second question I just want to ask for my clarification, for understanding, not a clarification. Whatever is being done on the platform of UN women and others, is it being done under the theory of positive discrimination, meritocracy, or under some sort of offensive ideology?
Okay, that's a very complex question. I don't know that the UN Women has projects in the U.S. I think it focuses more outside the U.S. and primarily, I think, in the developing world. It's supposed to. It does work in a positive way. If you went to people at UN Women and said, "Are you a feminist?" most of them would say, "No. I mean, we're just trying to work for women's rights, and it's not about feminism or something that you might interpret as being aggressive. It's not. It's simply, let's work for equal rights." And I was just at a meeting at the UN sponsored by UN Women and Norway, looking at parental leave, meaning you can get paid leave from your job for 6 months or 12 months to take care of your newborn child. And so in Norway and in the Nordic countries and other parts of the world, there was a very positive attitude toward that. But the interesting thing that they've had to combat is that this leave is for men and women. Okay, so it's not just women should be caretakers. Men also should be caretakers because their involvement in their child's life and nurturing is just as important as the mother. And so we have to get away from thinking that only women are maternal. Men are also have that capacity, but we have to encourage them, because in the beginning of this program in Norway, the men were embarrassed to take leave because the culture was that men have to be macho, they shouldn't be staying home with children, they should be the breadwinner, even though the idea was you're still getting paid, but you're going to take care of your children. Now it has changed, but it's been a decade to get the culture to change to match the laws. So that's the other thing that we need to work on. Now, one of the projects that UN Women supported, because they can have research grants to different people, and they gave a grant to a woman who is a member of the Tanzania Supreme Court. And she managed to get laws on the books for equal rights for women. So the law of the land in Tanzania is equal rights for women. But then she realized that in the villages, they weren't upholding that. And so she got a grant from UN Women to create an education program to go around from village to village to actually promote equality. And they did it through the arts. They did it through putting on puppet shows and putting on plays and getting people in the community to participate in the theater. And then they would have dialogue and they would act it out. And that was getting the message across. So, tying all of this together. This has been a great discussion, thank you. Other comments or questions?
Let's continue to take some more questions and comments. I think it is an important topic, and you're sort of our one chance this week to focus on this. So let's do another round of comments and questions. I see one student here also from the school. I don't know if, would you like to jump in?
Honestly, I agree wholeheartedly with what you say. I do believe that women should be given the platform to speak, not only in just the U.S., because we all know that the U.S. is an imperfect society. I just believe that maybe men in positions of power should be able to listen to women who might be inferior to them, to give women the opportunity to be able to move up the ladder. And there's just, as you said, how we're 99 on the list. It's just, I don't know, we're taking baby steps, yes, but I think we need to put on our big boy pants and start taking great strides.
Bigger steps.
Yeah. It's high time, especially now, especially with the Women's March. Women want to be out there. They want to be in positions of power. It's just that we might not have the resources. We might not have the platform to get where we want to go.
Well, like Norway and the Nordic countries today in their panel were saying that they were willing to take that step of providing their experience to other countries, taking it out to other countries, having them come and learn from their experience, because they've had ups and downs on making this work, but it's now ingrained in the culture. So if a man doesn't take parental leave, then they're embarrassed if they don't take it. So that's what we have to change. But institutions can set structural quotas for women's participation, and actually in Norway they do. You have to have a certain number of women in the parliament. I used to be with an NGO called Parliamentarians for Global Action, and I was asked to hold a workshop in South Asia. And what we were doing was to try to bring greater communication between South Asian countries and some reconciliation between particularly India, Pakistan. And so I was able to set up this workshop and who would participate. And we spent about a year planning it. So I said we had participants, delegates from different parliaments. And so I said, okay, you have to have more than one party in your delegation, and you have to have at least one woman in your delegation. And so when they arrived, they did it. So I had a woman from Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka. They were all there. And then we had different projects we were working on, and I set up a woman's workshop. And that's where I learned in Nepal, women couldn't own property. And that started my whole thinking about all of that. So we set up an agenda for these kinds of things to be brought up in the parliaments of all of South Asia. And at the end we did it for a week, and at the end we had a round table, and I said, tell me how this worked. Was it good? Did it help? You know, and the women said, you let us speak. I was just shocked. What? You're not allowed to speak in your own parliament? And that was the greatest contribution, they said, this workshop did, is we let them speak. That was a shock to me. So, you know, but through these kinds of structural things, we can make this grow. Okay. Other thoughts? Oh, in the back, excuse me, yes.
I'm sorry, I left for a while, so I'm not sure if I missed this or not, but I wondered if there were is there importance placed on women, for example, coming from Ghana, who, as you point out, had it rough, to the importance shifted to they speaking for themselves, or do they need to be spoken for? I wondered what the view of someone in your position is. Can they be properly represented by someone outside the group, or do they need to speak for themselves?
There are a few women, I think there's 17 in the parliament in Ghana, and we were able to meet with some of them. Kwame Nkrumah's daughter. Kwame Nkrumah's a very, high-level person who died, but and his daughter is a member of parliament, and we were able to meet with her and talk to her about, issues that were important to her and women's issues. And so she's working very hard to give voice to women. There are also a number of NGOs in the capital, Accra, that are working on women's issues. The interesting thing about Ghana, which I would really like to understand more about, is that every village has a queen mother. It's a matrilineal system, and so the chiefs and the king overall are men, but they have to have been born of a woman who was of the royal line. A little complicated, but so the queen mother actually nominates whoever the chief is going to be. So the queen mother has a lot of power in a certain way, and she's not the mother of the king or the chief or anybody. She's called queen mother because she's the queen of the community, and she is elected separately by the women. And interestingly enough, in every village, and then like 14 villages will make a division and so forth, they have queen mothers at every level. And the queen mother holds court at least once a week. She has her own court. And she has the authority to make decisions within that court that affect women. So a woman brings a grievance, and the queen mother has the authority to actually make a judgment on that. So it's a strange combination of cultures, where women can't own anything and they can't be a part of the main decision-making body of the elders and the chief. But the queen mother, interestingly enough, has a lot of authority. We met with the U.S. Embassy in Ghana, and they were promoting the elimination of malaria and sending out bed nets all around the country. So they sent out, with the World Health Organization, they sent out bed nets all over the country, and then they went back the next year to see how they were being used, and they were not being used. So what they realized is they hadn't consulted with the Queen Mother. So then they went back to the villages and they had meetings with the Queen Mothers saying, this is for the mother and the children to sleep in the bed nets at night so they don't catch malaria. And once that was conveyed to the Queen Mother, then the Queen Mother had the authority to tell all the villagers they had to do it. So it's an interesting bifurcation of authority. And we have to know more about it in order to work with it. Yeah, so I'm trying to learn that so that we can actually help the UN when they go in to understand the culture and work with the culture. I think there was somebody else? Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Sort of a half-formed thought, but sort of taking a deeper dive into, let's say, quotas and numbers for a little more qualitative. So how do we encourage greater gender equity within disciplines? So using higher education as an example, if you look at the humanities and the arts, women are much more represented than the STEM disciplines. Both, and it's, it starts out at the undergraduate level at a greater parity, and then by the time you get to PhDs being awarded, there's this huge gap, and then it's reflected in the leadership of universities. At NYU, we've had several women as the deans of the Tisch School of the Arts and School of Public Service, but never at the law school or the business school. And of course, then that carries through into the jobs that students after they graduate take. So I mean, that's a particular issue I think in the US, but I don't think it's exclusive to Western societies.
Right. I mean, within the university, it's curious because you would think that within an educated population, respect for gender equity would be paramount. But again, it's the culture. It's the culture. One of the ways you can get around that, or you can deal with that, which the UN is also doing, is for every position that's available, that you have to have women applicants within the pool, within the short list. Otherwise, you would say, we're not filling it until there's women in that pool. Okay, so then, of course, you have to get quality women nominated, and that is recruitment. And so, everybody's really busy, and they don't necessarily want to go out and beat the doors and recruit specifically for women. But at City College, which is a public school, we do have a requirement that when you have a short list of candidates, it has to have minorities, and it has to have a woman, at least, in your short list. And you get investigated. You have to report that to the administration, and they will investigate you. I mean, who you choose in the end, again, is up to you, what qualifications you're looking for and on merit and so forth. But there's an attempt to try to do that. But I don't know about other universities and how they deal with it. But interestingly, there are more women going to medical school now, and there are more women going to law school than men. Yeah, you realize that, yeah. So that's super interesting.
But it's only when they specialise that there's less women. So at the UN last night, even I met a girl who was a neuroscientist, a neurosurgeon, and she said that she was one of few. So the level of the percentage of women as neurosurgeons is about 5%.
Okay, when you get into the specializations.
Yeah, so that's where the higher level thing. And I was trying to test her on that because it's 7 years after the 8 years. So it's always at that ground level that we're all doing well and the numbers are great. But then it's like the next level when you have, Supreme Court judges and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Again, it's within the leadership that makes these decisions that you can bring women up and bring women in. But if you have a different kind of leadership, then all of that can be, undone, unfortunately. So we all have to take responsibility for that as well. Did you have a, yes?
What do we do in a situation where you find out that women don't believe in women's ability to lead, or to provide authority, or to do that, to lead and give a successful tenure like that? Because in Nigeria, I'm from Nigeria, and found that in the last some election, for a woman in party primaries, and a woman put in to become a president, and in primaries, the only vote she got was her own vote.
Her own vote, oh.
In the last election, you found out that the woman was able to get to the national level, because she was not in a popular party anyway. She was able to contest at the national level, and she got around 1,000 millions. You understand that? And in my university, we were able to conduct a research that you ask questions: do you prefer women to lead, or do you prefer women to be your boss? Most of them, no, even from women. And I think this has to do with culture, the value system. And when you get to the grassroots, because I work on maternal mortality. And
Oh, you do?
yes. And when you get to the grassroots, asking women, why didn't you go to the hospital? The husband has to give the authority, give the direction on what to do. Whether they attend the clinics, or they go to traditional TBA, but traditional birth attendants, or they take any step at all. I think the value system is very, very important, because in Nigeria, the value system of building a home, they don't respect women when you are alone or when you're not married.
Yeah.
So their desire is always to build their home, to keep their home. And at the end of the day, they leave the empowerment of women, or the willingness to build something for themselves is secondary. So they focus on the primary aspect of their life. And in the case of eventualities, maybe the loss of the husband or the dissolution of marriage, they are left at the mercy of family members, and that's why they cannot take hold or stand for their rights, that I want to own a property. For a woman that is educated, that is empowered, it's very difficult for a family member to come forward that I want to take your property. I want to take your husband's property, because she is able to defend herself. So I think the empowerment of women at the grassroots is very, very important. And I think we have a way to encourage women to see their ability in women to do some things. And because that's why we have there was a statement credited to our president last year in social media that he went to Germany, and they were asking about the statement made by his wife. And the president made a statement that, don't mind my wife belongs to the kitchen and the other room. And she doesn't have any say in anything that has to do with the nation. So you don't just mind what my wife is saying or what a woman is saying. That is why you can see that we have a high rate of maternal mortality in Nigeria, because people, they don't say they have to wait for the husband before they take any step, especially at the grassroots, at the local level. And that has been a major problem, because I think this culture, this value system is in us. So there is no, even if people talked about it outside, getting back home, they do another thing. They have to abide with the culture, with the value system of building the family and respect the husband, are always waiting for husband direction on any issue.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, it is a cultural issue, and even when we were talking at the UN earlier, just on something like parental leave, it is you have to change the cultural attitude. So you can work with the parliament and you can pass laws. So you need to do that. You need to work at that level, but you also have to work at the grassroots level and bring those two together. But laws and the rule of law based on equality and the right to own property has to be there, and then the education on the grassroots level, on the cultural level, then has to be brought up to respect the rule of law. So if we look back 100 years within the US, I mean, women were just getting to vote, and women were considered, you stay in the kitchen. And so it's taken several generations for women to get educated, to go to school, and begin to realize that they do have rights and to stand up for their rights. And in order to do that, they do need the laws up there to say, you're breaking the law. I have the right. It is there. The Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. We need those international laws for then women to say, look, this is what the law is. And the UN can play a very big role. In most peacekeeping operations, like in Sierra Leone, we were doing research in Sierra Leone. And I did a questionnaire to all the districts. And I said, you know, what was the worst thing and what was the best thing that the peacekeepers did? And they said they came to our village and they told us we had rights. Women had rights and children had rights. And then they defended us. And they set up human rights components within every level of the government to do that. Now, it didn't work perfectly, but at least those ideas can be put in place. But you're right, changing the culture is a challenge. But, you know, it's happened over generations and we can do it.